Hey, it's Chris, Crowdfunding Roundup this week. What do we got going on? Well, a little bit of everything, as always. Talking you through all the new games, what you need to know about them, my synopsis, my commentary, and, well, whatever else comes up in between. Don't take yourself too seriously. You just can't do that. It's no fun. That's why I do the channel. Let's go. What do we got going on first this week? Spectral and Sasquatch. Combo driven campaign here from Bitewing Games. Spectral being a ghost fighting, treasure hunting, I have a kids game named that, curse avoiding, tile flipping deduction game. And then you have the card driven map route building game in the form of Trailblazers. Now don't be fooled. Both of these are coming for a slightly lower price point, $45 for Spectral, but $15 for the cooperative. Now this is the other aspect of things you need to know. Sasquatch is a semi-cooperative. It's a trader game. And so that's going to both turn people on, but also turn people off, I think. The big thing you need to know for both of these, let's run you through. So 2 to 5 players, 30 minutes. There is going to be potentially a significant amount of take that because you're placing your workers, your treasure hunters, if you will, next to the sides of 2 adjacent cards in a potential 4x4 grid. And from 2 to 5 players, you are modifying what is out there depending on the player count because you may have to add rubble that takes the place of workers in the actual framework to make it sort of tighter, if you will, from a where can I place my workers style of things. Because when you place your workers down there, you flip over secretly the adjacent card on one side or the other, and you get to look at it and see what it is, because there are 4 rows of 4. You don't know which row is which because you shuffle up not only the 4 cards individually in each row, but then you shuffle the stacks of 4 as well. So A, B, C, D, or it could be D, B, A, C. You don't know. And you're trying to figure that out because each of those set cards is known to you in general speak, and it's going to clue you into where curses are going to be, diagonal, up, left, down, right, clockwise, whatever the manner or shape may be, but also where the treasure cards are. Because at the end of the game, when either all the workers are placed or all the players pass, that's the other caveat of the rules and what the end game conditions are going to be. Well, then it just ends, and then you flip over all the cards, resolving them one by one. And if you have a worker next to a card that has a curse token, because these cards tell you where to place the curse tokens or the treasure tokens on other cards, then your workers get removed, and only the workers that are left out in the center of this board at the end of the game score points. It's more thinky than it appears, and that's the theme of Bitewing with this campaign. Trailblazers, don't be fooled by all the super high recommendations down here. No, it's a good game, but it is probably the most AP prone, heavy thinking, route building game that I have potentially ever played of the tile laying, card playing, route building style of games. And so that's what you need to know. Is it right for you? Are you looking for something that heavy? If you're not, the Sasquatch expansion probably isn't going to change it necessarily, because as much as I like what Sasquatch is bringing here, and let's talk about what Sasquatch is bringing here in a second, you're doing a 2 to 4 player, 30-minute cooperative. But what you're doing is you're dealing out hidden roles to each person, either human or Sasquatch. And if one person may be Sasquatch, well, then they automatically, at some point in the game, potentially reveal Sasquatch, and then all the other players have to scramble before the end of the round to create a loop that Sasquatch is contained in. Otherwise, the Sasquatch player wins. And I like that because it potentially takes out a lot of the AP that is with this game in the first place as an individual competitive game. But you're going to have to buy the base game as well as the expansion to get that mode if that's what you prefer. And therein lies the dilemma, right? It's a $15 price point for the expansion, and it looks like it's going to cost you about $40 total if you do not want the expansions to go with Trailblazers in the first place. Then it's going to be $50 plus dollars. What you're doing is you're creating individual loops on a turn-by-turn, camp-by-camp basis as you create your own little camp around your central card of one of 3 different types that have to match and that are, bonus dependent depending on which modular expansion you're using with animals or whatever objectives that are both big objectives, but also individual objectives as well. I mean, again, it's a very solid game. And if you're looking for something on the heavier side of this definitely has that in spades. but that's what you have to ask yourself. And that was probably the biggest turnoff for some of the other people in my group, was that this was just so thinky in terms of how you're drafting these cards and then having to play them, because of the possibilities contained on every single card of so many ways to be able to place it and so many locations and so many dynamics and interactions, that it really also made closing those loops, as simple as that seems in theory, it made it actually quite difficult. And that's my biggest buyer beware from this, more than anything else. So if that's you, I mean, again, all of the seals of excellence are down here. Everyone loves it. So if you're looking for endorsements, there you go. But you just need to know that going in. Spectral is going to be heavier. It's going to be a little bit more take that, because, you know, you go, like I said, until the end of the game when all the workers are placed potentially, but you can bump other people's workers out of spots. And so you can then essentially refresh their pool of workers in the first place to allow them to deduce more other spots on the board. So is it worth it if you know where they went and what they know, or is it also going to behoove them, because then they're going to have more opportunities to place going forward? So mini expansions for both of them. Take it for what it is. There you go. Bitewing is putting out another solid campaign, and it's already got what, almost $50,000 at the time of me filming this. So there you go. Second up here, we're going to go over to Perch. Perch from Inside Up Games. Now, I have mixed feelings on this. I think this looks like a very, very interesting area control style game, but the last 2 or 3 from Inside Up have been a little bit hit or miss for me. Block and Key, Earth, you know, I'm a little bit trepidatious now, as much as I like the idea of this. What was the other one? Terminus, that went on crowdfunding more recently than this one. And so this is a very interesting test, because it's again a 2 to 5 player area control style game where you have 28 of your flock of birds, and on a gradual turn by turn basis, you're adding them to a mutual draw bag. And at the beginning of your turn, on 5 rounds, you draw 2 birds of potentially any color from this centralized bag. And then you also get to play 2 of your own birds. And what you then go around and do is you play them one at a time on one of the many areas on the board that you're trying to control. And depending on the player count, it will depend on which type or how many of different types of tiles that there are, as well as the whole tile size of the map in the first place. And they've got a very peculiar, very interesting setup of this board, because they're not exactly adjacent. They're in staggered rows, but you can place potentially any person's bird in any person's area to try and disrupt things. And you have ways of taking birds off as well as capping them. And there are 9 different creatures as well, or creatures or instruments, because one of them is like a scarecrow, for example, so not exactly a creature, that are going to have special asymmetric powers that you can activate once per round, in addition to your bonus of playing your bird, or flock as the terminology is called in this game, into said area. And at the end of each round you score. The person with the most points actually becomes the person who goes first in the next round. As you can see in an area control game, oftentimes the player in last in terms of turn order has the biggest advantage, and they can see the most adaptability because of what has already been played in front of them and given them the most options of trying to get what they want in an end game situation. So that's the way that this plays sort of a leader or a catch-up mechanic as a whole. And then you have variable numbers of these creature cards, like I mentioned, of the 9 that you can play with, depending on which of these areas are out in the first place. And here you can see in this little GIF the areas that it's kind of staggered, like I mentioned, and you only play with the creatures whose tiles are out there. So they all have specific creature tiles assigned to them. And so you only play with the ones that are there and not with the ones that aren't. And like I said, you go around, you get 4 turns every round, 5 rounds, 20 turns. There you go, game end, most victory points and most points overall at the end, because each of these tiles is going to score also completely separately and differently, asymmetrically even. It's going to have like a first, second, and third. And so first might get you 3 points for first, 4 points for second, and 5 points for third, for example. But if you tie, you're going to lose out and you get 0 points. And that's the biggest dynamic difference with this game in terms of the take that as well, because, you know, usually we're accustomed to games where you tie and you split the points, or you both get the same points. Well, no, you're just going to cancel each other out. So if you cancel each other out on the second place reward, like I just mentioned, right? First place gets 3, second place gets 4, but you have 2 people tied for second place. Well, then second place is canceled out. There is no third place because you have the second and third tied, and then fourth place doesn't get anything. So only the first place one would have gotten points on that tile, as the example they use in the rule book. And how do you feel about that? Is that going to be enough? And again, it's not just in like that order, right? It could be first gets 5 points, second gets 0 points, and third gets 2 points. So they completely change the dynamic on every single tile. So how are you going to interact? How are you going to have this be working? And it is an area control game. And so even though the player count says 2 to 5, it really recommends, even though it doesn't recommend, it recommends 3, because if you play with 2, you have to play with a dummy player as well. How do you feel about that with area control games? Because let's be frank, area control games are best at 3+ anyway. So that shouldn't be a surprise if you're looking at this, but you just need to know it in the first place. If you're doing the early bird, if you're getting in the first 24 hours, which you're well past at this point if you're watching this video, well, you're not going to get your name on the inside of the box. Well, you can pass on that, but you're getting a little deluxeifications, you're getting it a little earlier, and that's the incentive to back it on crowdfunding from inside up. They're pretty consistent with that, and it's going to cost you $37, so take that for what you will. But that is Perch in a nutshell. What do we got next up? Next up, we got actually Marrakesh. Marrakesh. I think this is the 6th iteration of, no, just kidding. This is the expansion from Marrakesh, and it's interestingly enough coming from Queen. Queen became very divisive when they ran the first, 2 or 3 campaigns for the base game alone, but then De Beer has also picked up the Essential Edition and sported that more at retail. And so the Essential Edition, basically the bare minimum scraping by of this, the cardboard only, reduced size of everything component-wise, is $72 cheapest at Board Game Oracle on the time of me filming this. If you want the Queen Edition, which is the classic edition, who names this crap anyway, by the way, it's going to cost you $120 in Queen's website. And that's not even the deluxeified one. The deluxeified one that came out like in the first and second, I think there's already been like 3 Kickstarters already for it. And maybe even a 4th now at this time, because I think Queen did like a backstocking of one like a couple months ago as well. It's going to cost you like Godzooks 150, 180, probably more along those lines. I'm not even sure you can get that one at retail yet, because again, the retail distribution for this has been very strange, and which is why I'm also commenting, right? Like De Beer is one that did the retail. And so now you've got Queen coming back to Kickstarter to fund the expansion. And how do you feel about that? Well, apparently this Feldian game of point salad proportions is really liked, but also the price point has been a barrier to entry for a lot of people. That was the whole reason De Beer picked it up in the first place, to try and reduce it somewhat, but it's still more expensive than almost most non-miniature based retail games in the first place. And if Feldian proportions of point salad wasn't enough, they're going to add 2 more mechanisms here with this, as well as a solo mode, to expand it even further. Now, there's some good and bad that goes along with that, and I'll scroll down here and I'll show you. Well, what I mean by 2 new mechanisms is that I actually had 5 different modules, 5 modules, 6 modules, a bunch of different modules that are going along with this. Here, I was right, 6 modules, and as well as the solo mode. And so that sounds, kind of good, Chris, but then they also make the mention of, oh, well, it doesn't really fit in the base game. We're, storing it separately as well. And they run you through a little bit of what the modules are doing with the special buildings and the camels and the provisions and all of the luxury goods that you may want or need, and then the solo mode. And then they talk about retail availability. You can't pick it up at Essen. Okay, but here's the interesting thing, right? They say it's compatible with any of the other base games that I've talked about, right? The Essential, the Classic, and the Deluxe, which means they're including both of these things in there. So again, what's the price point for that? Oh, you're going to pay $55 to get the one that matches both. So again, it's sort of this bad FOMO that really pisses me off, because why not just say we're going to put out a classic edition or a deluxe edition or an essential edition? Because otherwise, if you're one of these essential people right now, you don't want the classic or deluxe edition. If you're the classic and deluxe edition versions, you don't want the essential edition. You're just paying for extra stuff that you're not going to use. And so I don't see a ton of incentive to necessarily get that, except for the FOMO side of things, because Queen is now not really going to any retail distributors, and now they're really marketing things up in the secondary market. So that's the question: is De Beer going to put this out on the retail with just the essential edition for $35 later? Vienna, Cuzco, again, back ordering some of the other stuff from their more recent crowdfundings. And I mean, people seem to like this of more of the original 4 that went on crowdfunding like 3 years ago now almost. This one has probably gotten the most acclaim. Hamburg and Amsterdam have really kind of flown under the radar as a whole with the remakes of Bruges and Macau. And so this was the original one, the more original of the designs, not a remake. And I mean, Queen is not really good at communication either. They've been really kind of lackluster. I actually was just looking into one of their other previous ones. I just got an email notification about Red Palace, Alhambra the Red Palace, just forking open their pledge manager. And we're talking like over a year, maybe a year and a half out at this point, and they just opened it up, which was interesting because I had like looked at the late pledge, and so they sent me one as a reminder that I had, gone to the late pledge page and logged in and potentially looked at it, but not filled it out, right? But then you go over to the backer page of Red Palace to actually get some more information. Oh, you can't, because they did it for backers only. So why a fruitcake would I late pledge If I can't even see the backer update and can't figure out what's on there to tell me what the plan, what the timetable is, and why I should even get it now, because again, there's no gameplay. I think there's barely even, or maybe even not even a rule book at Red Palace at this point. So, I mean, to have more of this, you know, yeah, you're striking while the iron is FOMO hot on Marrakesh, but, you know, fulfill some of the other stuff. Get Cusco, get Vienna taken care of before you're coming to this. You know, it just seems half-baked right now. I know you're sticking with the big properties and this is the moneymaker for you, but at the same time, like, it feels like the other stuff gets shunted aside, so that's kind of off-putting. So either way, I mean, apparently people really want this, because otherwise you don't raise $100,000 in the first 24 hours, but take that for what it is. Speaking of games with hype, now we're going to go over to Midhalla. I'm supposed to be getting a prototype copy sometime during this campaign, so at some point I'll have something out in the next 28 days. It's a long time now that I think about it. But this is Midhalla. This is a co-op dungeon crawl with a tower defense feeling-esque, with more of a Gloomhaven predictive combat as opposed to a luck-based system. So basically what you're doing here is you have a campaign-driven scenario-by-scenario system where in the Viking theme, you're going to be trying to hold demons at bay, keep them locked into the area of the dungeon that you're in, and not let them do either one of two things that they need to win. Do all of the damage to the lock so they can escape, or knock out all your heroes. And the very interesting thing about how this game is structured is that it is more like D&D rather than a little bit of Gloomhaven in that sense. And what I mean by that is if you go over to the rulebook here, it explains to you these 4 subsequent phases that turn into one full cycle of the game. Exploration. So you're exploring the map, triggering events, seeing what the actual story of the campaign does. Then you prep. You're building, you're engaging, you're buying, you're spawning enemies, you're putting your heroes down. Again, all of these are done completely separately. There is no overlap in terms of which ones are going with which. Then 3, you actually fight. And then you do all of the rewards at the end. So it's not too dissimilar, but especially with the first phase or two, you know, it's not story, event, battle, story, event, battle. It's, you know, okay, you do all of this, then all of this, then all of this in the scenario driven chapters. And so the issue though that you need to know is that you're only doing this 3 times. And so you only have a limited amount of time to either accomplish whatever you need to do or defeat all the demons. I mean, this rulebook is pretty extensive. They run you through how you're going to be exploring these tiles, flipping them over, seeing what's there, and then prepping all of your different actions, exchanges, and builds that you can do in the line of what is available to you on a turn-by-turn basis in the second phase of things. And then if we scroll down far enough here, we get past the spawning of the enemies, the positioning of your heroes, and we get into the combat. Again, thing you need to know about combat is that enemies go, traps go, then you go. Them going before you is going to dramatically change or position how you're going to do things differently, as opposed to if you were having like a Gloomhaven variable initiative setup, or if you were going first before the bad guys as well. So we go back over to the page here and you can see a little bit of what they've got included in the dungeon crawl thing. And Rado's got some really positive words for this. So check out his stuff if you're interested. But it gives you a little bit of sense of what the pledges are going to be. The gameplay all in is actually going to cost you only $100. I was concerned this was going to be closer to like 150 or 200. It gets you 1 to 5 players. It gets you the expansion included, which you can also get down here separately, as well as some neoprene mats. And it's miniature driven, card based, you know, dungeon crawling in an exploration style in the first place. The stretch goals here, you can see a little bit of the luxification, a little bit of gameplay content, and we're going to kind of see where it goes further on. They show you how you're going to be potentially, just with little gifs here, of the combo-driven campaign combat system, as well as the exploration and the character progression, including the items and the weapons that you can customize, buy, and craft that we talked about during the second phase as well. Rulebook, player aid. So this is a little bit more like the root player aid and game rulebook, if you will, where the rulebook is really, okay, everything errata-wise is in there. If you want to learn how to play, though, they actually say go to the campaign book, because they'll run you through just the basic sort of the Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion-esque scenarios, where you slowly, gradually increase the complexity of those and you learn the rules as you're actually playing and going, which is very nice, which makes it more accessible in the first place. And having a player aid that you can refer to, again, all of this stuff on the page that you can check out individually right now. So again, we're seeing a little bit of a different thematic incorporation and approach already with the Viking. We don't see a lot of that, and it's going to be somewhat different, hopefully. It's just a question of how different, because at least with just the rule book and the description so far, the description of being tower defense, I don't quite see it, but that's where you're really going to have to go read through this rule book of how the enemies and you are taking your turns, especially with this gate that you're going to be having to guard or target depending on what the objective is of the scenario in the first place. So otherwise, the rulebook is relatively straightforward. Despite being 40 pages, it's actually probably a little bit easier to read than you'd expect. So, there you go. That's Midhalla. Check it out if you're interested. Again, a little bit better price point than I was expecting, but I almost kind of wish it was even, with all of the other heavy miniature driven games putting out miniatures excellently already. These will look a little gray and nondescript for me right now. And so would Standees been better? Team Standee! That's all I gotta say. Anyway, there you go. Then we go over to Joyride, Survival of the Fastest. This reminds me of a little bit of a combination of Heat, Pedal to the Metal, with a little bit of Thunder Road Vendetta style-esque thrown in, but more of an impulse-based game. And speaking of impulse, apparently that's back on track. It's like 2 years overdue. I did a little bit of a preview on it. And so apparently maybe they're going to produce it at some point now. But anyway, so this gives you a combination of those two style games where you're essentially a car taking up 2 hexes on your grid-based board game where you're shifting in and out of gears using dice based on the number of gear that you're in, and then locking some dice and then rolling the other ones that are available to you to program your actions, including movement, steering, as well as playing items. And this is going to be, just like with Thunder Road Vendetta, it's going to have some heavy take that you're going to be aware of. But it's also going to be less maneuverable and less variable depending on how you're actually rolling these dice, because the die number is how many spaces you move, and you can only adjust or steer at the beginning by like taking your first movement in that by adjusting it 1 hex left or right, depending on which way you're trying to go. Variable setup, as you can see here in the modular terrain, or you can kind of customize it how you want. Now, the big issue that I have with this, and the reason I would say, okay, just be aware of this, is you look right here, and you can see that they've got a couple pledge levels. They've got the retailer, we'll skip that, that's fine. You've got the next gen duel. So they've got a 2-player version that's standalone as well, if you just want to get a taste, an aperitif, appetizer of it. And that's going to cost you about $39 before shipping. Okay, I understand that. Then we have the second level pledge, which is about, $55 right now at the time of me filming this. And you've got that with sort of a 2 to 4 player. Now, the thing I have concerns about, and the thing I don't like seeing, which is again why I'm surprised you have how many people backing this at this point? 535. This next pledge level, I kid you not, it goes up to 100 pounds from 50 pounds. And that's going to put you already at about $127. And I'm sorry, this was wrong. This was $64. So 64 to 127. So you're doubling the price, literally. And all you're getting there is the stretch goals. That is the only pledge level with the stretch goals. What are the stretch goals right now? Well, right now the stretch goals are 2 extra maps and an extra character car. And that's what this is right here. 2 extra maps and the mutant beast car, which I guess has maybe some asymmetric powers if it's just like all the other cars that you get, because basically what you're doing in this game is you're rolling these dice, you're having asymmetric abilities. If you have dice to play that turn in that gear, or the gear hasn't been damaged, you can utilize more of them to your effect, but sometimes you won't have gear, sometimes you won't have dice in the first place that are going to be in the gear, so maybe you only have abilities or weapons to use, and it's going to have some heavy take that. A lot of the cards and the use of these weapons is going to be against other people. Sideswiping, rear-ending, head-on crashes, special effects, dropped items. And if we scroll down here to the right way, you can start to see what some of the items are. Dropped items, fired weapons, rockets, mines, oil slicks, nitros. And so the dice that you're going to be rolling, though, are 1s, 2s, and 3s. And so what I mean by that is the 6-sided dice have 2 1s, 2 2s, and 2 3s. And so that's going to be how far you move, or what allows you to shift up and down the gears. So that's a lot of money already, even for 2 maps and an extra item add-on right now. So 50 pounds for that. Yeah, I mean, I can see the value potentially being there, especially if they're going to give you just a bunch of unlocks. But if it's only going to be stretch goals and you're going to have slow funding and you're going to plateau because you're not going to get much in past this early bird, where are you going to go right there? Because you're at 37,000 pounds, you haven't unlocked the first stretch goal. So you have a lot of optimists at that top tier, but ultimately is it going to pan out at the end? That's really the question I have to ask, and that's kind of the wonder, especially when you've got other games out there like Heat, Pedal to the Metal, Flamme Rouge, as well as Thunder Road Vendetta. How does this compare? Do you need this? As well as Brotherwise Games is also putting out a Mario Kart version of a little bit simpler. Do you want a gear shifting game or not? If you don't want gear shifting, I stay away from this one. If you want a gear shifting, are you better off getting this one in about a year and a half, or are you better off waiting for the reprint of Heat? So take that for what it is and just be aware. This has some cool powers, but is it going to be drastically different apart from that? You check it out and see. Next up, we're going to talk about it because it's here. It's To the Moon Bestest Memories. Now, again, how is this game getting $86,000 compared to all the other games I've already talked about this week? Well, it's because it's based off of an RPG video game that's had a couple episodes come out in the past. And you can go check that out over on their website here, To the Moon. And it's just kind of, I think, cashing in off of that, because there's not really any explanation of how to play the game. It's another one of these tie-ins from comics and video games that we've seen recently as a run on crowdfunding. And they basically say you're somehow getting cards from these memory lanes and then using them to score points and tuck them under each other and getting the right points in order to score more later. But that's about it. And you just randomly at the end pull the end of line card and the game ends and whoever has the most points wins. You want a travel edition? Great, you can get it. You want a whole bunch of stuff that we see with a lot of these campaigns that's not related at all to board games in the first place? Well, yeah, you can throw a bunch of that stuff on as well. So that's it. That's all I can tell you about it, and that's why it's getting almost $100,000. So I guess there's a lot of people that have an interest in this IP, and that's kind of why you're seeing it, and they're going with these early bird bonuses too. So again, that's all I'm going to say, and I'll leave it at that. So there's To the Moon. Did you know Wildlands Reforged was going on over at GameFound right now? Yeah, I missed when the initial launch of it because GameFound kind of hides these. It only has 7 days left. It only has 350 backers doing it. Now, again, 350 backers and $385,000. You can do the math. That's about $1,000 per backer. $1,000 per backer. That's a forking ton. But the question is, if you look at this very closely, Wildlands Reforged, they've done the Wildlands already. It raised about 10 times this amount on Kickstarter. Why is it only getting 1/10 of that now? I think it's the GameFound effect, folks. I say this with other projects, I say it, and I think people poo-poo me and doubt it. They just don't have the exposure for the casual layperson. How many people from Dwarven Forge that follow Dwarven Forge over on Kickstarter know that they're over on GameFound? I think that's just the lack of, I don't want to say transparency, I don't want to say marketing, because I'm sure they sent out tons of emails, but the casual RPG browser does not go over to GameFound. Kickstarter gets tons of these that raise, $100,000 for, things I've never even heard of, things that are coming out of the woodwork every single day, every single week, basically. And so the RPG money is there just as much almost as the tabletop board game side of things. But on GameFound, apparently not. But GameFound and, Dwarven Forge, Dwarven Forge is known for their high costs and their super deluxeified tabletop, terrain. So yeah, you want it painted. Look at that. That small area painted is going to cost you $1,100. And people just throw money at this left or right. Like I said, the average pledge level, if I did the math there right in my head, is over $1,000. So yeah, you get a little bit better price point, but shouldn't this be doing better? Am I wrong? What am I missing? Then, last up this week, we have The Veil. Resurrected Seasons 1, 2, and 3 reprint. This is really for what they say is 2 and 3 reprints because they're trying to get them at a better price. 57 backers getting $10,000. I think I kind of remember one of these other previous seasons going on. And they say that this is like a completely unique deck builder where you've got your own individual heroes and you're customizing from their own individual deck. Really, it reminds me of Sentinels of the Multiverse with a little bit more depth because you're going to be drawing like 4 or 5 cards to your hand, and then you have like this row of cards in front of you that you're going to be buying from or banishing and slowly replenishing and going through in order to upgrade your actual deck to defeat the enemy. And like I said, with each season, there's something like 15 different heroes or 20 different heroes, I think, total. And there's like 60 now total. No, there's 45 heroes and there's 15 villains. That's what it was. So a total of 60, but it's expensive. This blue tier is only going to get you some of the stuff, and it's really going to be really expensive to get all of the stuff if you're looking at it from that aspect of things. The tricky point is they don't really tell you exactly what makes it unique. They say several times on the campaign page, this is a unique deck builder, this is a unique deck builder, this is a unique deck builder, which is fine, but I need to be shown. And a trailer doesn't do that. The how to play doesn't really do that, but again, it shows you the 5 complete decks, right? 3 heroes, 1 villain, some starter cards, and the Fate deck. And the Fate deck is really the other thing that makes it a little bit different as well. But they run you through, again, what the different ones are, just in a nutshell. They all have the starting hand, sort of like your Marvel United situation. And then they give you a little bit of how it's going to be played as well. I think there's a rule book here. Yeah, right there. And it's a little bit of a dark magic vibe, if you will. So they say actually probably should be at least 10 plus for age. And there's disturbing imagery. So I guess so. But it says right here, this is what they say. Each player, you need hero, starting deck, exclusive market. That sounds a little bit like Sentinels of the Multiverse, right? With a little bit of a different stuff. Nothing bad about that. People really like Sentinels of the Multiverse. But do you want to pay $55 or realistically much more than that really to get like a $95 including the campaign book? But got a backing, it's got a support. Third time around, second time around. This is only the second created, but maybe the first one was different. But $10,000, so must have something going right for it. So if you're interested, different deck builder, The Veil, check it out. That's it. That is the roundup for this week. A little bit of everything. And spoilers, you made it this far in the video, you get to hear what's coming up next. I have a big pile of games sitting next to me, right there in that box, right here. I just filmed for the Patreon folks. So they know the 4 new games that I got in the mail today, including 3 upcoming crowdfunding games and 2 retail. Intrigued? You should be. One of them, I've talked about that I was going to trade for it. I was going to do my darndest, and I did it. It's a big name. It's on the hotness. That's all I'm going to say. And, you know, coming up this week, we have a couple reviews. Coming up this week, we also have one of my favorite videos to do every single time I do it, the Don't Back Anything video on crowdfunding. Why I run through as many projects I can in a short amount of time, and I tell you not to back any of them and why you shouldn't back any of them, just to make sure you're not FOMOing. Because, as always, you know, you can always do what you want, but make sure that you're not doing it for the wrong reasons. So, support your publishers wherever, not just on crowdfunding. I got another one up my sleeve, too, a little secret trick. And if you want to know what I'm going to be doing also a little differently, again, Patreon. Anyway, that's all I got. Have a great weekend. Have a great Friday. I'm off. Kids have 1 more week before school starts. And trying to make the most. I'm working like every single day starting Monday for like 8 days in a row before the kids go back to school. So right when the kids go back to school, their first day of school is going to be my last day of that work week. So like they're going to be at school the rest of the week and I'm going to be off the rest of the week. So it's going to be kind of weird. And I'm going to, you know, I'm kind of sad though, because I kind of wish it was this coming week so I could spend more time with them. But at the same time, it's kind of nice too to have a little downtime and maybe only a little bit 3-year-old time and, you know, maybe just a little bit of, you know, get some stuff played, just relax and hang out with the wife as well. Because, you know, there hasn't been much of that this summer because the kids are home and they're active and they need attention and we do a lot of stuff together as a family. So, you know, I'm always okay with that. And, yeah, just a bunch of stuff to review and put together and talk about. What did you think of my reviews this week? Guilty Gear? Wayfarers? I'm trying. I know reviews are my least watched thing, but you know what? I'm working my way into a groove or a niche, and like I said, I got a special idea to, you know, change things up that other people aren't doing, so we'll see. You want to vote on it, you can go over to Patreon and... can't even say that with a straight face. That's all I got. Stay classy. Have a great weekend, folks. Play something if you want. Don't play anything. Just have a good time. Hopefully you're not working. Thank you in the first place for getting me this far. I appreciate it. See you around. Stay classy.